What happened to Bethesda in 2019? This is a question I think many of us have been asking because even if you like or dislike the company, you like or dislike some of their recent games, they certainly have made some pretty questionable or curious decisions throughout the course of 2019. I think it's a fairly safe conclusion to say that 2019 for Bethesda was not a good year and probably one of their worst years, not necessarily from a financial perspective, but rather from a PR perspective. They saw more controversies all throughout 2019 than any other major year. And in this video, I wanted to talk about some of that, why some of it I think is blown out of proportion, but why some of it is very genuine and merited. Although, an important disclaimer, this is actually part one of a two-part series. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look back at 2019 to end off this year, but tomorrow I'm going to be uploading a video talking about why I think 2020 could be a massive year for Bethesda. They have several major things lined up, and if even just a couple of them land, I think we could see a pretty substantial comeback story. So don't just watch this one, get mad, and not watch the second one that definitely is more positive. We're leaving the negative in 2019, and hopefully all through 2020, Bethesda is amazing, right? So when it comes to the negative side of Bethesda in 2019, I think a lot of people associate it just with Fallout 76, and rightly so. Fallout 76 was the vast majority of the negative press for this company. Many of the more questionable decisions were exemplified with that game, but it actually isn't the sole offender. Even on the other side of things, particularly with the Elder Scrolls Blades, Bethesda did some interesting things. It definitely had a different trajectory, probably ending on more of a high note for 2019, but separate from that, there also definitely was some controversy or backlash with Fallout 4 and Skyrim. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about all of those games and how I think this all ties together. So of course, this really all starts with Fallout 76, and although Fallout 76 is a very controversial game and pretty much always has been, I feel like many forget that halfway through 2019, Fallout 76 was actually doing pretty okay. It was definitely at a high point. And I personally saw many users coming to my channel in particular saying, hey, I just tried the game again and I'm actually really enjoying things. So what happened? What was the contrast on the first half versus the second half? Well, starting off 2019, Fallout 76 definitely was in a fairly bad spot. 2018 was basically filled with controversy, and although Bethesda ended off that year with some pretty major updates addressing some of the major issues, there was still a lot more to be done. At 2019's start, duping ran rampant, although we did start to see some ban waves at the start of this new year. This wasn't all positive, mostly because there's a ton of users claiming they were improperly banned, and there's still a lot of debate around that, but we also saw stories like Bethesda requesting users write essays to get unbanned, which certainly isn't positive. But as time went on, we actually saw several bug fixing updates, additional bans on dupers, and even systems put in place to limit duping in Fallout 76. All of these being received as pretty positive and good improvements to the game, definitely a big step in the right direction. And also at the start of 2019, we saw the release of the first DLC wave. Wild Appalachia certainly had its ups and downs. It was at this point that the meme of Bethesda taking 2 steps back for every 1 step forward, in particular with their updates implementing new bugs, really got created and somewhat held true for many of these initial updates. But overall, Fallout 76 was getting a constant week-by-week flow of new content. And even though some of that content did disappoint, overall it was fun. People who had previously passed up on the game were enjoying it yet again, and there was always something new to be playing. Overall, that first DLC wave was a massive success, and by the end of it, Fallout 76 was held in higher regard than it ever had been before. That's not necessarily saying much considering where it started, but things were certainly going well. Although, towards the end of this, we actually saw the announcement and implementation of repair kits into Fallout 76, the first utility item where you could pay money and get an in-game advantage. These were controversial, but the way they were implemented, there was a better free alternative, so people kind of were like, okay, this is fine. And all the other positive content to just release really offset that negative. Around the same time, we also saw the release of the Sheep's Watch, which was easily one of Fallout 76's best DLCs to date. Overall, I would say even though Fallout 76 did have some bad things happen, some negative press, it was mostly positive. The same thing, unfortunately, couldn't be said for the Elder Scrolls Blades, as right around the same time, in April to May of 2019, Bethesda made some pretty questionable changes in that game also. Under the guise of community feedback, they lowered the amount of time it takes to open a chest in that game, specifically the silver chest, this being one of the predominant ways you get loot in Blades. But at the same time, they made it notably harder to actually get silver chests. So they open faster, but you had less of them. Between that and other nerfs to Blade's Abyss section, which people typically use to endlessly grind for loot, but Bethesda actually made it harder or loot more rare during that, it alienated a lot of players from what was otherwise a pretty good game. Fortunately, Bethesda did remove some of those negative changes from the game, and things like chest timers are no longer in the game whatsoever, but it only came just recently, and several changes came months too late. But overall, I would say during this time, even though Fallout 76 was on the rise, there were other areas where Bethesda was still receiving negative PR. But then came E3, and I think even though 2019's E3 presentation from Bethesda wasn't their best, it was one of the good ones as far as Fallout 76 goes. We saw the reveal of Wastelanders, proof that Bethesda was going back to their roots, human NPCs, dialogue choices, and specifically dialogue choices in a Fallout 3/New Vegas style. But also, of course, they dropped that Battle Royale mode, which was highly regarded. And even further, in stark contrast to the base game release, it was basically bug-free. And at this point, it seemed like Fallout 76 was pulling a full-on No Man's Sky and making a recovery. But then following this, one of the major issues with Fallout 76 was the amount of desirable content went down and undesirable content went up. I recall even like a month or so after the Battle Royale update, I was like, alright, where's the rest? Is there any more DLC content coming? We didn't really get a roadmap, we didn't hear much of what else was on the way. Now in retrospect, we did get other things like Meat Week, we got the Vault 94 raids, which although good in concept and execution, highlighted some bugginess or crashing problems with the game, so they didn't land as good as they could have. And although there were some scattered updates in the second half of 2019, it wasn't that content-filled approach we saw from the first half of the year. And as content slowed, but new and additional microtransactions did appear, such as the fridge, and other utility items like the scrap kits or scavenging station, I think people's frustration started to grow. But the one major holdout was, hey, Wastelanders is just right around the corner, so even though we're kind of in a content drought somewhat, that's okay because we're about to have Wastelanders. That was delayed, and there was definitely some frustration, but I think overall people are like, alright, that's fine. Make sure Wastelanders is good, it's a solid update for this game, and we'll come back to play it. But then just after Wastelanders was delayed, I think that's where things reached new heights again with the Fallout 76 backlash, as Fallout first did release, which releasing a new subscription service and a ton of stuff behind a paywall right after you delay the major DLC is just not a smart move. If the launch of Fallout first coincided with Wastelanders, I doubt it would be a big issue, or not nearly as large of an issue as it was in its current state. As time went on, some of the other cracks around Fallout 76 started to show. The hacking problem persisted and didn't really get resolved in the Battle Royale mode initially, but then even just over the past few weeks, we've seen hacking really make its way into the adventure mode. It became clear that the need for a better anti-cheat is definitely there. More preventative measures to address these issues, not just Bethesda having a fairly quick response. Although, again, credit to them, they have been pretty quick in responding to some of these hacks. But it wasn't just problems with Fallout 76. They were definitely the most popular, but even as you shift over to Fallout 4 and Skyrim, some of the recent Creation Club updates have seemed to be a little bit more costly. They're pretty similar to all of the past ones, except now as time goes on, modders are just not as active. Every time Creation Club updates, Fallout 4 and Skyrim script extender must be updated, but then also certain mods that depend on those too must be updated. So as some modders move away from the games, those updates take a little bit longer to come. For some, the modders just don't play the game anymore, so they've said, hey, we don't plan on updating our tools or our mods anymore because, well, we just don't have a ton of interest. And although it hasn't become a major problem thus far, it certainly has become a major frustration around some of these updates. And among the modding scene in particular, that rising frustration with Bethesda from Creation Club is definitely there. Also, the fact that Bethesda released a Fallout 3 remake fake Creation Club thing that took you back to Fallout 3 but isn't doing a proper remake definitely was a sore point for several people. And then some just final things that weren't overtly negative, but just kind of added when taken into context with everything else. Doom Eternal, which was probably their other most anticipated game or update this year, was delayed also. And then other releases like Wolfenstein Youngblood, as well as Rage 2, that just didn't deliver as much as people were hoping for and ended up kind of just going away. Wolfenstein in particular had its own set of controversies. And when you take all of that together, there was basically no 2-month period in 2019 when Bethesda was not in the news for something negative. This not just for Fallout 76, although of course that was the biggest offender, but really across the board for nearly all of their games. Now on one hand, I think a big part of this is it became popular to hate on Bethesda. They were like a new entry to the EA and Ubisoft club of, hey, we don't like you. So some things definitely got blown out of proportion or exaggerated to heights that it probably wouldn't have if it was a different game company, but at the same time, I think Bethesda definitely earned their spot there to some degree. They did a lot bad over the past year. A lot of really questionable decisions that don't make a ton of sense to me and probably don't to you either. A lot of people, including myself, have cited perhaps a push from more upper management, ZeniMax themselves wanting more monetization in their game. There's definitely a reason Bethesda implemented utility items, implemented the Creation Club, and continues to support it. Consistent and more regular revenue definitely seems to be a priority from the company. I think this is the first year we really saw a lot of that. And much of the time, it seems like some of that development or some of the focus on that came at the cost of the base game functionality. As we saw some of these issues arise with not just Fallout 76, that is the most obvious one, but also things like Blades and Wolfenstein. And when you take all of that together, it's how Bethesda got to where they are right now. They still are well respected. I imagine once that next single player RPG does get announced and released, a lot of this will be somewhat forgotten. But I think only really if it delivers. If Bethesda has yet another blunder with Starfield, assuming that comes out next year, or even the Wastelanders DLC doesn't deliver, I think that's actually pretty bad. The wariness or concern you see among many players right now would be solidified. On one hand, I'm really hopeful that this does not continue, that 2019 just ended up being a particularly bad year for the company. But on the other hand, with how consistent this was, being an issue in not just one, but several of their major titles, it does get me concerned that it isn't just a fluke year and something that is just marking a transition for the company overall. Although, with that being said, as I mentioned, this is really just part one of a two-part series. So after watching this, I do highly encourage all of you to check out my part 2 as to why 2020 could be massive for Bethesda. They have a lot of stuff lined up that's coming shortly, and it could really be a comeback year for them, and I think it's not that unlikely. But overall, with all of that being said, that is Bethesda in 2019. Hopefully in 2020, we see a substantial improvement from them. Pretty soon, we should hopefully hear more about Wastelanders and get a better idea if that's going to be something that truly delivers or is another bit of a blunder. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.